Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Healthcare.gov, the Affordable Care Act. Yes, it can be repealed. This is not a statement by an ideologue. This is a statement by an historian. The historian's name is John Fund. He's done his homework here. There is an example 25 years ago of repealing a massive health care entitlement passed by Congress, endorsed by the late Reagan administration and by the Vice President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, who was about to run for the presidency. And the repeal was signed on to by the dominant Democratic leaders at the time in the House and in the Senate. Yes, it can be repealed. Healthcare.gov, the Affordable Care Act, law of the land. Right. So was, once upon a time, Medicare Catastrophic Coverage Act. Mr. Fund, a very good evening to you. The Medicare Catastrophic Coverage Act panicked everyone after they passed it. Why, John, and how did they get rid of it?
Well, it provided a whole bunch of great benefits. The problem is it also brought costs. The timing was off. The costs and the benefits often did not line up, and there were unintended consequences. For example, people often had their own insurance plans, and they were happy with them, and they didn't want the government to basically put their insurance coverage out of business. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
And ultimately, there were more perceived losers from the program than perceived winners. In other words, people, if you asked them, said, are you going to gain or benefit or lose from this, more people said lose. And as soon as the losers reached critical mass, they started campaigning against the bill, and congressmen started breaking. And finally, there was one symbolic moment when the House chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Dan Rostenkowski, was literally chased down a street by angry senior citizens who surrounded his car and started putting themselves on the hood, and he had to flee on foot. And at that point, it was over, and within weeks, something that no one had predicted could ever happen was repealed by Congress, and the repeal was signed into law by a president who said he would never do it. 25
years ago, they just undid it. In other words, they hit the fix and they undid everything. They made it go away. And
the fix button was the problem. In other words, they thought they could just do fix after fix that would paper it over. Does that sound familiar? But
yes,
they didn't work, so they hit the delete button.
Now, confess, John, this is pre-website, right? This is pre-digital. We didn't have IT developers in 1988. That was a dream for Steve Jobs and a few parts of Microsoft. So this was all paper and phone call, and it was for a very small part of the country. It was just for Medicare.
It was for all seniors over the age of 65, yes.
So they didn't take anything on the scale of healthcare.gov, and they panicked and got out. The Democrats did. They panicked and ran away.
Yes, and ultimately, the people who can remember that most, the congressmen who I talked to who were there at the time, say, yes, this is different, not with Obamacare, but the scale of the problems is also different. And the anger that is building, more and more people now not only are having their insurance dropped, but they know someone who has their insurance dropped, or they know someone who will have their insurance dropped, or who is worried about having their insurance being dropped.
And they didn't wait for the 90 election, did it? They just went right for it.
No, in fact, they wanted to take care of it as quickly as possible to get it off the table, because if it had remained on the books, it would have become perhaps the signature issue of the 1990 midterm elections.
All right. John's piece is up on NRO right now. Medicare Catastrophic Act, 1988. Look at it. Look at the details. This is an excellent historical analogy for a possible road ahead. David Drucker of Washington Examiner joins, because it's not all just about healthcare.gov these days. It's also about the Republican Party, which needs candidates, which needs policies, which needs a platform for 2014 and 2016. So I go to the Republican Governors Association, just meeting last week. David attended, and David has a piece up right now that is, I told him immediately, this is a Moneyball piece. If you know the name Haley Barbour, you understand this is inside the machine. A very successful governor of Mississippi, but before that, he led the Republican Party. He's also often been mentioned as a vice presidential or presidential candidate, but this is a very sophisticated political actor. David, good evening to you. Haley Barbour, he has a new friend. Who is it?
New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. And in fact, they've been friends for a couple of years. The long and the short of it is that Haley Barbour unexpectedly had to take control of the Republican Governors Association as chairman back in '09. And that is when Christie was embroiled in a really tough election battle with the incumbent governor at the time, John Corzine. The chairman who had preceded Barbour, Mark Sanford of South Carolina, he wasn't sure if he was going to invest in New Jersey because it's like Lucy with the football for Republicans. It looks winnable, they invest money, and they lose.
Right.
But Barbour had some experience. He had helped win a governor's race as RNC chairman in '93. He liked Christie, and they spent, and as he told me last week, he figured in for a dime, in for a dollar. So after they had spent about $5 to $7 million, they spent a couple million more to help him win by 4 points. And ever since then, these two men, very similar in their political style, in their aggressiveness, both with similar experiences, having to fight really hard for what they got early in their career, because Mississippi was once all Democratic. He is all Democratic, and they became friends, and they talk. They both had to deal with natural disasters as governors, and it's a relationship that flourished professionally and politically.
What I like about it, David, a lot, is that Haley Barbour is extremely well connected to all parts of the party, historically, reaching back to the Republican takeover of Congress, 93, 94, and also the successes during the Bush years, the recovery from Katrina. Haley Barbour was critical to what successes there were as governor of Mississippi and in that whole region. So he is a very, very tested leader of the party. And Chris Christie, who right now is magic. I mean, the man is charismatic, but he's not wired into the party because he wasn't a politician before he ran for governor of New Jersey. This is a wonderful combination. And you're saying they're friends now, but does that mean you look at a working relationship, David? Are they going to work the country together?
Well, they've had, before Barbour retired as governor after 2 terms, and while Christie was in the middle of his first term, they did speak professionally. And so in fact, I write in the piece that the relationship is both personal and professional. And I could envision a scenario, given the relationship, given that they both like each other, where Christie functioning as the new guard, either as a candidate or as somebody in office, relies on the counsel, wisdom, and institutional knowledge of somebody like Barbour, who knows where all the bodies are buried and has really tested political instincts. Christie has what I would still call, in some ways, raw political instincts, at least if you're looking at the national picture. Barbour has seen it all from every vantage point, whether as chairman of a party, chairman of something like the RGA, or as a governor. And so it could be a very potent combination because they complement each other. They would complement each other so well, and because they both understand each other.
Mr. Fund, I'm reading Scott Berg's Wilson biography, and I recommend it to everyone. It's filled with scene and incident and anecdote. But immediately, Mr. Fund, it comes to mind that a governor of New Jersey and Colonel House of Texas, who elected 4 Democratic governors in a row in Texas, and that was a volatile combination, but it worked for 2 terms in the White House.
Absolutely. Every president needs someone who's a flag catcher, someone who's a wise man, someone who knows the local territory. We've seen that. Ronald Reagan reached out and picked a stranger, James Baker, who served him very well, both as chief of staff and as Treasury Secretary. Other presidents have done the same thing. John Kennedy even picked his brother, Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General and basically top counselor. I believe that if Chris Christie were to run for president, go all the way, I think at the top of his wish list for chief of staff would be someone like Haley Barbour.
And David, I just tease you a little bit because I'm reading Scott Berg's book. Isn't that a wonderful historical analogy for the Republicans? There we have Woodrow Wilson, president of Princeton, no experience whatsoever, picked by the machine by Smith of New Jersey, put into office for about 600 days, and he was running for president, and the man who helped him wired him into the National Party. He won the South 90%, was a man from Texas, and Haley Barbour fills the bill. He'd deliver the South.
It's ironic, but it's actually the kind of connection, in a sense, that can help steer Christie in a direction to reach out to the elements of the party that he will have to if he's going to be successful in 16.
And you're all shaking your heads going, New Jersey's a blue state. What are you thinking? In 1912, New Jersey was a Republican state. That's right. Hughes won New Jersey in 16. New Jersey and New York were Republican for Woodrow Wilson. And yet the combination of Wilson and a savvy fixer from the South, Colonel House, that took the presidency in the very unusual year of 1912. It can happen. And it's a wonderful story. Both of them. They're good at the dinner table, too. When we come back, more on healthcare.gov. I'm John Batchelor.